Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So, as a little follow-up to the short video that I made, I don't know, about an hour ago and put up, and that was a young person had come who's in school, and they said, man, I'm really getting bombarded, especially this month. Wa alaikum salam. I'm really getting bombarded this month because of it being so-called Pride Month. And I was asked by my class or teacher, right, can a person, right, can a person be Muslim and gay, right, at the same time? And he's like, I know how I feel about it, but I don't really know how to articulate, a really good response, right? And so he had asked me, and so that's why I made the little video in which I had said that, we should not just accept the question as it is put to us, right, but rather look at the way that the question is being framed, and typically within that you will see that there is an agenda, right, and that they would like to force essentially one of two kinds of responses from you. They would like to, if they could, force the yes response, right? And this is not unlike the Qawm Lut when they came, right, to Lut alayhi salam, right? And you know what we want, right? We want to do what we want to do. So one answer they would like to hopefully get from you is, yes, sure, right? The second one, if you happen to respond, say, more emotionally, say, no, you cannot, right? Then they will also likewise have achieved the goal of labeling you, right, a bigot or, whatever it is, right? So in some ways, no matter how they frame the argument, right, it's kind of like mission accomplished. But in addition to that, there is also the question that's also being put out there, or rather, it should be a question, right? It's typically framed as a great assumption, and that is, desires are not blameworthy, right? Desires are not blameworthy, and so what I find disturbing about this whole conversation about this is that I find that it's a tendency that Islam is being discussed in great lengths, but the sources of Islam are not, right? And by meaning, plain and simple, right, that while this topic is discussed as, can a person be a Muslim and a homosexual, right? Can desires be blameworthy or can they not be blameworthy, right? That there is no invoking of the Quran. Well, let's see, what does the Quran have to say? There is no invoking of the statements of the Prophet ﷺ. Let's not look at that. There's no invoking or looking at the statements of the companions or of the latter generations of scholars. I don't know. Let's all make it purely discursive. Let's all make it purely speculative. And yet, when we look, for instance, at the 81st verse of Surah Al-A'raf. So the 7th chapter and verse 81. إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالِ شَهْوَةً مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ. So if we look actually at the verse, which is one of the key verses that we use as an adillah or as a proof for the impermissibility as well as the depravity that is homosexuality, we see that there is both an act, right, ata, and by here the verb ata means you're going to come to, and who are you going to come to, right, and nisa, you're going to come to women. What is the purpose of you coming to women? It is obviously to fulfill sexual desire, to have sexual intercourse, right? So the verb ata here is being used to refer to the fulfillment of sexual desire. And let me add this as one little footnote. We must always remember, and I think this is something that maybe we struggle with a little bit today, that the Quran, while it is never vulgar, right? You will never find the Quran using vulgarity, but it is explicit. What I mean by this is, what are we talking about? We're talking about sex. It's explicit about what's going on, but it is not vulgar. In the same way that Allah talks about حُورٌ مَقَصُورَةٌ فِي الْخِيَامِ فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Right? That Allah talks about, for instance, in the hereafter, or you know, إِنَّ الْمُتَّقِينَ مَفَازًا, right? وَكَوَاعِبَ أَتْرَابًا, right? That Allah talks about, for instance, in Surah Al-Rahman, or talks about in Surah Al-Naba, right? In the 55th chapter or in the 78th chapter. One of the rewards of paradise will be, right, the fulfillment of sexual desire. So it is explicit about sex, but it is never vulgar. Something that, particularly today, that the ability to talk about sex is either seen to be vulgar itself, and that kind of creates a prudishness, right, where people don't want to discuss it, or the only way they can do so is with vulgarity. And alhamdulillah, mashallah, the Quran doesn't do this. So, okay, the first part of this chapter 7, verse 81, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالِ, you're going to come to men and perform the same sex act, right, penetration, right, other types of acts, that you would do with women. But the other part that is considered to be musraf, right, the other part that is depraved, is also the shahwa, the desire, right? Shahwatan min dun nisa. And so there has been, in the way the argument has been framed, and in the way that the laity of the Muslims, right, the awam, the general Muslim public, right, today, they have said, yeah, oh, of course, you know, a desire can't be blameworthy. Where do we get the proof for this, right? So in this verse, we find that indeed the desire is blameworthy, right? It is a sinful, blameworthy desire to have, because, and then another person was saying that, well, there's no correlation between desire and an act. And I was actually, there is. What you actually mean is causation, right? That desire causes action. And that, no, we all have a measure of control, right, that we have been imbued with by Allah to exercise control over our actions, right? And so while we would agree, in large part, that there is not causation purely from desire, there is clearly correlation, right? People tend to do what they desire, right? And so we have to be careful. Again, semantics matter. We want to make sure that we get, right, the argument right. And so as we see in the verse above, it also helps us to see something very particular to the topic of homosexuality. One that they have been working, and by I do mean the homosexual lobby has been expending great efforts to normalize homosexuality for the purpose of no longer that we see it as something different or exceptional. However, once again, the Quran refutes this. And so in the 80th verse, right, وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ, and when Lot said to his people, أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ, are you going to come and commit, the same verb, ata, are you going to come and commit an abomination, an obscenity? مَا سَبَبَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. And it is a particular abomination and a particular obscenity and a particular fahisha that is exceptional, right? It is an exceptional one. It is not normal, and it cannot be made to be like other things. Such to the point that it was said, what? مَا سَبَبَكُمْ بِهَا, that it was never done before. Min ahad, by anyone. Min al-alamin. So it also showcases in a couple of these verses here, and they're repeated in other parts of the Quran, that the issue of homosexuality despite the efforts of the LGBTQ Qawm al-Huruf lobby to have it presented. And that's why there's been a full court press. Every single kid's movie that comes out has to have a homosexual individual. Every single cartoon, there has to be, right, to what? To plant it in the minds of children from the earliest ages and to shame the parents, right? A full court press, a full propaganda campaign attempting to shame parents into accepting it, all under the auspices of them being some sort of minority oppressed group, which is why they have, to a great degree, the very language that they use to describe themselves has been pilfered, from the black movement, right? Because, we are actually a people who have experienced, actual, historical, transgenerational, transcontinental, right, suffering. But let's put that aside for a conversation another day. And so I wanted to follow up and say, again, be cautious and be curious, right? Not just cautious, right? But actually be curious. When a question is put to you, look at it, examine it, ponder it, think about what is being got at here. In this case, we have a group of people that would like to have the equivalent of a get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to morality. Simple as that, right? As I said, ask them, do you accept that Allah, do you accept that God is the author of man, the author of the human being, and the sovereign author of all morality? And if so, do you then accept the obligation to conform to whatever the dictates of that morality are? Do you accept them? Or are you looking to get some sort of hall pass, right? So you'll accept that, and again, this would be to a potential person who wanted to be Muslim and gay. So you're going to accept, without question, that drinking is impermissible, that gambling is impermissible, that usury is impermissible, that murder is impermissible, that eating pork is impermissible. We can go on and on and on. You will accept these without really any adjudication or too much, right? Too much sparks, right? You'll pretty much accept that as is. But when it comes to this other one, you want to have a hall pass. And my question would be, why? Now, some will say, well, they don't have any means to fulfill that desire. Yeah, that's right. You don't. You have no means to fulfill that desire. And, right? And so, of course, along with, well, you as a heterosexual, it is permissible for you. Yes, it is. Right? Why? Because the author of the human being and the sovereign author of morality said so. And we understand that Allah huwa yaf'alu ma yurid. Right? This is where we have to push back on that community and say, if you are truly interested in Islam, then you will accept the dictates of Islam. And by that we do mean dictates. You will accept them just as the rest of us do, under the understanding that what is made halal and what is made haram are not done to dispossess one group and take something from another, or to just sort of like as a random act of cruelty do something mean to one group and to another. No. We understand that morality, the shape that it is given, the form that it is given, and the articulation that it is given is because Allah fa'alun lima yurid huwa yaf'alu ma yurid. That Allah does what He so desires. He does not take counsel. And His command is law. And so if we want to engage in these public conversations about homosexuality or really any other issue, then it has to be done with a spirit of courage, right? A spirit of courage to engage these matters and to do so, with etiquette, adab, right? Because for me, it ain't personal. Yes, it is a fahisha, right? Just because it ain't personal doesn't mean it's still not disgusting, right? But I don't really have a dog in that fight, in that I don't have any dog in a fight about usury, right? About riba, or about khinzir, or anything else, right? Or about adultery, even as a heterosexual person, right? It's just, هذا ما قال Allah. This is what Allah has said, this is what He has written. And so it requires a level of due diligence, right, to engage revelation, and it requires a spirit of honesty to be willing to challenge and even disappoint other people when we say, هذا هو الإسلام, this is what Islam is. It may indeed disappoint some people. That is okay. Right? لا يغرنك تقلب الذين كفروا في البلاد. Right? Don't allow what other people seem to be doing and how they're enjoying. Don't allow that, right, to make ghurur. Don't allow it to deceive you. Stick to the facts. Stick to the truth. Let me see. Salah says, well, the issue, however, is that many of these people either wrestle with any type of theological. Yeah, it's true. And so, as I had mentioned today in the khutbah, right, we need a return to diligent, systematic study of Islam. And so in the khutbah today, and I'll just wrap this up, I don't want this to go on for forever. In the khutbah today, I had mentioned that, the incidents that took place in Texas, for instance, where children were slaughtered in a school. And some Muslims were shook by this, like their faith was shook by this, right? And I said, nobody's faith should be shook by this. And there are people like, no, nobody's faith should be shook by this if you read and study your religion, right? And so to that issue, very, very quickly, very succinctly, right? Okay, children murdered in a school. Definitely an unspeakable tragedy and an act of just unmitigated evil. How do we reconcile that with our notion that Allah is both Ar-Rahim wal-Jabbar? How do we reconcile that God is all merciful, all good, that God is loving, and He's also all powerful? Because our human understanding is that, well, if we had power, well, you'd exercise it and you wouldn't allow this kind of thing to happen, right? And so we understand that Allah's mercy is wasi'ah. It is wide. In what way and how is it wide? We read that during the Mi'raj of the Prophet ﷺ, he came upon a place in the heavens in which there was Ibrahim alayhi. And around him were many children. And when the Prophet ﷺ asked about this, they said, these are the children of kuffar, who died as little kids, right, before the age of taklif. And where are they? Paradise, with Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is what allows us to understand tragedy, right? And through the careful study of Revelation, you will be able to understand reality, right? You will understand haqiqa bit tanzil, right? You will understand reality through revelation. So anyway, I don't want to turn this into another khutbah. You can go check it out today. It's up on YouTube, or maybe I'll upload it later on. But anyway, just put on your thinking cap. Don't always accept the way that arguments are presented to you. Be curious, analyze them, and don't be afraid to push back or to challenge others. So, Jazakumullahu khairan, wa salli wa sallam wa baraka Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.